أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وأتباعه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Assalamu alaikum to everyone here who made it. This presentation actually, listening to the first two presentations was pretty similar. So, I feel like maybe this is going to be a bit repetition. And obviously it ties into the presentations tomorrow, inshallah. So, but it's some of my own reflections from one of the narrations from the Qur'an. And if you can guess, it's about Prophet Yunus. And so my title is Fish for Thought. And, I'll try to leave, plenty of time for questions. So unless, somebody wants to ask something while I'm going through the presentation, I wouldn't mind, as long as it's probably focused to that particular portion of the presentation. So this topic is about gratitude fundamentally, and kind of what, like I said, what the other, especially the last presentation, was about, specifically my perspective on things, and how I see the world and what is happening to me through my life experiences, and how I see things or how I perceive things is really what matters fundamentally at the end of the day. My perception of things is how I experience life, whether I have a positive attitude or really a negative attitude to what's happening to me. And this narration from the Quran really illustrates that. And there are many sort of elements at play that go into gratitude. Specifically, the experience itself, what I do with it, so my response towards it, and really is the appropriateness of that response. Because the response itself dictates how I feel, or is really sort of an emanation of how I feel in a sense. If I feel a certain way about it, I'm going to respond one way. If I feel another way, I'm going to respond a different way. And in that regard, it sort of shapes, how I go through life or how I take in or internalize that experience that I'm going through, good or bad, that I may perceive. And that fundamentally plays into gratitude. Specifically, if I don't like that experience, generally I'm not very grateful. And if I do like it, then I am grateful, or not necessarily, but likely to be. And so that is what this presentation really is about, focusing on that aspect of things and the elements or the belief elements that go into it. And so the objectives here are to explain, who am I and what is my position within my life experiences, especially the ones I mentioned I don't like, because specifically if one does believe, it's easy to show gratitude for things that I do like. That's, quite simple to do, in the sense that it doesn't require me to reorient my perspective on life necessarily. It doesn't push me or make me grow. But the ones that I don't like really sort of challenge my perspective and my perception about what I believe. And then also, based on how I feel in those experiences, can I run away from my feelings? Is that an appropriate response to just run away? And I think Birkan mentioned that earlier about, we're always running. And the question is, where are we running to? Maybe not physically or materially, but inwardly, where are we running towards? What is our objective there? Where's our goal? And given running or going down some path has a consequence, what are the consequences of potentially running away from how I feel, or choosing a response that may not be appropriate or really compatible with my inward reality? And what are those responses that I can choose from? And then how do I know which one is the right one? That's the question. How do I know the the path I'm going down is the right one necessarily? So, and this is a question that people always ask. If I feel a certain way, how do I know what I do with that feeling is the right response or the appropriate response? And then, which ties into that third question, what is the result of that response? And how do I know what the result is? Maybe the result will shed light on if I chose the right way or not. That's the question. And so that's what I'm trying to, or attempt to accomplish, inshallah, during this presentation. And so this is, I'm going to first mention initially at the beginning a series of verses that I picked from the Qur'an that highlight this topic. From Surah Yunus, chapter 10, verse 98, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فلولا كانت قرية آمنت فنفعها إيمانها إلا قوم يونس لما آمنوا كشفنا عنهم عذاب الخزي في الحياة الدنيا ومتعناهم إلى حين. Then there has not been any town that believed, so that belief benefited it except the people of, excuse me, that's a typo, should be, or it's fine, Jonah or Eunice. When they believed, we removed from them the punishment of disgrace in the life of the world, and we granted them enjoyment for a while. So you can, if you pick apart the words here, you can kind of know where this presentation is going, because belief is mentioned in the essentially the beginning portion of this verse, and that is really the essential component of this this presentation. And the other question here being asked is, what is the punishment, and do I experience the disgrace in the life of this world? If I don't believe, and belief is essentially connected to gratitude, and if I do believe, what enjoyment am I experiencing? And then from Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter 21, verse 87. وذنون إذا أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وذنون إذ ذهب مغاضبا فظن أن لن نقدر عليها فنادى في ظلمات أن لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. And the man of the fish, when he went out angry, and thought that never would we determine upon him. And he called out within the darkness, there is no God but you. Glory be unto you. Indeed, I was amongst the wrongdoers. So this is, a very important verse, and Norsi, I think, even has a section on this where he talks about, and la ilaha illa ant subhanaka inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin. Indeed, I was amongst the wrongdoers. And again, we'll sort of touch on this and what this means within the experience that we're going through and our response, because you can see there's a certain response that Eunice has here, Jonah has here, or the companion of the fish, really, or the man of the fish has. And what are the elements taking part in here? Determining, or divine determining, and darkness.
Suhail, you're mute.
Oh, sorry. And then the next verse is from also Surah Al-Anbiya, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين. So we responded to him, and we saved him from distress. And so, and then as it goes on to say, and thus we save the believers. So again, tying in to the previous verse, Indeed, I'm amongst the wrongdoers. And then uh, the response to that statement, we responded to him and we saved him from distress, and thus we saved the believers. Um, is this the response we're looking for? That's the question. And is this the response we experience from our recognition? And then from Surah Safa, which has probably the longest narration of his story, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, chapter 37, and beginning from verse 139. وَإِنَّ يُونَسَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. Indeed, Jonah was amongst the messengers. إِذْ أَبَقَ إِلَى فُلْقِ مَشْحُونٍ. When he ran away to the laden ship. فَسَاهَمَ فَكَانَ مِنَ الْمُدْحَدِينَ. And he drew lots and was amongst the losers. فَالْتَقَمَهُ الْحُوتُ وَهُوَ مُلِيمٌ. Then the fish swallowed him and he was blameworthy. فَلَوْلَا أَنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُسَبِّحِينَ. If he had not been one of those who glorify, لَلَبِثَ فِي بَطْنِهِ إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ. Certainly he would have remained in its belly until the moment they are resurrected. فَنَبَذْنَاهُ بِالْعَرَاءِ وَهُوَ سَقِيمٌ. But we threw him onto the open shore while he was ill. وَأَنْبَتْنَا عَلَيْهِ شَجَرَةً مِّن يَقْطِينٍ. And we caused to grow over him a plant of gourd. وَأَرْسَلْنَاهُ إِلَى مِئَةِ أَلْفٍ أَوْ يَزِيدُونَ. And we sent him to 100,000 or more. فَآمَنُوا فَمَتَّعْنَاهُمْ إِلَى حِينٍ. And they believed, so we gave them enjoyment for a life. So I'll touch up on all these verses, but it's a very important passage in the Quran, I think, that really succinctly and very beautifully articulates the position we are in, the responses that we take, the results of the response that we have to those experiences, and the relationship between creator and created in that sort of experience. And then from Surah Al-Qalam, chapter 68, verse 48 to begin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. فأصبر لحكم ربك ولا تكن كصاحب الحوت إذ نادى وهو مكذوم. So be patient with the judgment of your Lord, and be not like the companion of the fish when he called while he was distressed. لولا أن تداركه نعمة من ربه لنبذ بالعراء وهو مذموم. If not that a favor overtook him from his Lord, surely he would have been thrown onto the naked shore while he was blameworthy. فأجتباه ربه فجعله من الصالح. But his Lord chose him and made him from amongst the righteous. And so those are the verses that his name is mentioned elsewhere in the Quran, but these are the verses that really sort of expound on the story or narration of Jonah. And this is these are the verses that I wanted to touch upon today. And so the first question is, who am I and what am I doing? Because experiencing things in life is automatic. That's not the issue. I mean, everybody goes through any experience at any point in life. Every moment is an experience. So that's not the issue here, and that's not really man's objective, to simply experience, regardless. Tomorrow we're going to touch upon a certain experience that the world over has gone through over the past year and a half. That happens regardless of my choosing or not. Something's going to happen, something I like or don't like. But the question then is, if I take a step back and look at it, who am I in this experience? Who do I choose to be, or who do I see myself as? And given that, based off of that, what am I doing with that experience? one option is just to experience and not see anything in it and just keep on living. That's one option. Or there's another option, and that is the option, as the Quran will show, to see myself in a different light, and therefore informs what I'm really doing or what I should be doing, given my humanity. And so I'm going to start off with these verses from the Safa, chapter 37 again, verse 139, 140. And I'm going to ask a series of questions just to provoke some thought and share my own thoughts, and I love to hear what others have to think. And these were just my thoughts from these verses. وَإِنَّ يُونَسَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ إِذْ أَبَقَ إِلَى الْفُلْقِ الْمَشْحُونِ. So indeed Jonah was amongst the messengers. So the question first is, because especially those sort of who attend frequently the sessions, they know that the emphasis in the Quran is not really narrating these stories for narration's sake. Primarily because the Quran is very succinct in what it narrates. It leaves out extraneous details that don't really add to the principle that I need to take away from this. And it says straightforward, indeed Jonah was amongst the messengers. So Jonah being a person, a human being, whom I've never met, but he's a messenger. And that messenger carries a certain message, within him, that's with him. And the same question I can ask myself. I'm going through an experience, just as Jonah has. I live that experience just like he does. He doesn't choose necessarily what that experience is, nor do I. But in him also, so we're essentially in the same position, fundamentally. In the sense that we both go through certain things, like or don't like. In that regard, then I'm, in a sense, in a position of a messenger, any messenger for that matter. So I can therefore say I'm also amongst the messengers. So long as potentially I see the message within me. And, that's going to be the question that we're going to go through here, is what is the message, or what message is Jonah carrying in his experience? Because we're both human. We both are in the same position. I can choose to not be amongst the messengers and have a different take of the world, different viewpoint, different perception, different deen, as the Quran calls it, or worldview. Or I can have one like Jonah's, and we can be essentially, we're not exactly the same person, but essentially in our position the same. So the first question is, because the Quran is narrating it to me, am I in the position of Jonah and the messengers? So what am I doing? What is my position? Then it goes on to say, when he ran away to the laden ship. So, not to get bogged down in details, because as I just said, the Quran leaves out these extraneous details. And people can read the story, but he is running away because of some experience, potentially, that he doesn't like or is not satisfied with. And they say with his people who didn't listen to him, but, doesn't matter. As the Quran says, he ran away. It doesn't matter what the experience was. It can be any experience. It can be that experience. Somebody doesn't listen to me. Or it can be something, there's a virus and I don't like it. I have an illness and I don't like it. But just because I don't like it, can I run away? And that's the question. Am I running away? Am I fleeing from the experience? I can't necessarily, and it's not necessarily fleeing away physically per se, because I can't necessarily flee away from an illness or a virus. If I get sick, I get sick. But in a sense, in what sense am I fleeing away? Maybe, as the Quran is trying to allude to, maybe fleeing away from what my experience is in the sense of how I feel. I can't reconcile or I can't deal with how I feel in that moment. And so I don't want to address it. I don't want to think about it. I want to ignore it, or I just sort of experience it and dispose of it. So why do I run away? Maybe that's the reason. And what is the laden ship I'm running to? What is this sort of ship that I'm going to set out on to flee from the world? What is that? And, maybe it's the ship that takes me away from the world I'm experiencing. Um, and does it, it's not some physical ship out there per se, but it's the ship I take on. Maybe the ship of, for example, a very practical or modern example is, if somebody says, especially in certain societies, let's say I try to drink away my problems, potentially. I try to forget something. So I'm going to drown myself in my sorrows and take that sail on that. Or maybe, uh, for example, I can't deal, let's say, with what's happening, let's say with my illness. So I will try to rationalize it. I will try to understand the illness. I will try to take medicine for it to cure it, but never actually looking at what it means. What is the underlying meaning to it? So the ship, in a sense, is like trying to find material things, material objects, and pursuing them, or maybe certain philosophies or ideologies that allow me to escape reality. Then it goes on to say, فَسَاهَمَ فَكَانَ مِنَ الْمُدْحَدِينَ, and he drew lots and was amongst the losers. So while I can do that, I can take that position in life and try to run away. In a sense, I could do that all the time because I don't necessarily control what my experiences are. I don't get to choose them necessarily. So in a way, I'm just drawing lots my entire life. And when you draw lots, you don't control the outcome. You just literally pick something, and if you lose, you lose. You pick, let's say, you're supposed to pick the shortest stick, and if you pick the longest stick, you lose, or something like that. I don't control that, and in a sense, my life is a series of moments of that, where I really have no control. I'm just picking amongst options, but that are already presented to me, and I don't determine the outcome of those options necessarily either. I don't give them existence. Also, what this verse may be alluding to is by choosing to run away to that ship, am I amongst the losers? Did I choose really to run away and therefore be amongst the losers in this regard, in one sense? And in another sense is, even if I choose to run away, can I really escape my reality? Can I really escape what my feeling indicates? What does it mean? I can't, as we'll see. I can choose to run away as much as I can, but I cannot escape from my humanity, my conscious reality, trying to make sense of the world. And then, as the verse says, فَالْتَقَمَهُ الْحُوتُ وَهُوَ مُلِيمٌ, then the fish swallowed him and he was blameworthy. So in a sense, he drew lots was amongst the losers on the ship and thrown overboard to be swallowed by the fish. Question is, am I also doing the same thing? Am I throwing myself overboard along with the message? Because Jonah represents the message. He's a messenger, represents a message, some sort of message that talks about the reality of things, what things mean. Is that what's being thrown overboard to be swallowed by the fish? And what does that fish represent? Is it, darkness, despair, um, a severed connection, and a severed connection with whom or to whom? And is that my punishment? And is that why I'm blameworthy? Because in a sense, as we back to the first question, who am I? I had an experience in a sense like Jonah. I'm Jonah, and within me was a certain message, my consciousness was telling me something, but I chose to necessarily ignore it, ran away, tried to escape reality. Maybe have some experience I don't like, illness, loss, grief, despair. These are common things that push somebody to do that. Um, and, I don't necessarily control the outcome. And again, throwing myself overboard in a sense to be swallowed by the fish. And is that my punishment? So what is my response? So, like I said, I can choose to do that. I can be swallowed by the fish, and in a sense, that fish represents, like I said, darkness, despair, severed connection, um, law, sort of um, purposelessness, thinking things are sort of haphazard, random. Why is this happening to me? Why this and that is occurring, and not seeing anything meaningful in there. And that becomes sort of my punishment. That becomes hell for me. That is an option. Whereas the Quran is presenting a different response. One of two really. Chapter 68. فأصبر لحكم ربك ولا تكن كصاحب الحوت إذ نادى وهو مكذوم. So be patient with the judgment of your Lord, and be not like the companion of the fish when he called while he was distressed. So contrasting patience, sabr, with judgment, hukum, and not just anybody's judgment of my Lord. Contrasting with the companion of the fish, which is interesting, when he called while he was distressed. Distressed in the sense of not happy with the condition he's in. And so I can ask myself from this verse, is my blameworthiness, as the prior verses were saying, tied to my perception of what I'm experiencing by not being patient with his judgment? And why be patient? Because is his judgment wise? And the other thing I found interesting from this verse, which ties into my response, is the fish really my companion? Because depending on how I see the fish can be good or bad, potentially. If you take the fish to also represent the things you don't like as well, is the fish necessarily a bad thing? Or is the fish my companion? So turning the position I'm in around and flipping it up on its head, turning it around from being in darkness or despair or like a grave, and seeing maybe a virus, as we'll talk about tomorrow, as a companion potentially. Maybe it's from the same source, of existence as myself. Maybe we're one and the same in that sense. Maybe I don't want to interact with, let's say, a disease or an illness, but are they really evil? Are they really bad? And then chapter 21, verse 87, وَذَنُّونَ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا فَظَنَّ أَنْ لَنْ نَقْدِرَ عَلَيْهَا فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ سُبْحَانَكَ إِنِّي كُنْتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. It's a very, very beautiful verse. Again, choosing my response. What is my response? And the man of the fish, when he went out angry, is my response anger to what's going on? And if you consider anger is a sort of lack of gratitude. And thought that never would we determine upon him. In a sense, like when I'm angry or short gratitude and have no gratitude with what I'm experiencing, or don't reflect and I'm not patient, as these prior verses have said, am I ignoring his that he is determining potentially? So in a sense, am I throwing over the message overboard into the sea and not recognizing his judgment, that things are determined by him and not by me? And he called out within the darkness, there is no God but you, glory be unto you. Indeed, I was amongst the wrongdoers. Do I recognize my wrong position in that regard, and my position of anger or lack of patience, my lack of gratitude, to not see that things are determined by him. Do I see that? Do I see that aspect of messengership within me to recognize my fault? That, okay, I'm not perfect, and maybe I took that experience the wrong way, but let me correct myself. Let me sort of reorient my perspective on things, and return back, that broken connection I had, that out of anger I said, well, why is this happening? And, this shouldn't happen. And, it could have been this way or that way. But going back to there is no God but you, that there is nothing in control. There's no source of existence, nothing that has any power or will to determine anything except him. All, to him belongs the glory, and I am the one that chose wrong. I didn't choose my experience. He determined that. I didn't choose, what would happen to me. He determined that. But I did choose how I interpreted it. And that's what made me amongst the wrongdoers. By not being patient, by not seeing his judgment and his determination as being wise potentially, and then therefore being angry and impatient and ungrateful. And as to bring back chapter 37, فلولا أنه كان من المسبحين, and if not he, and if not he had been one of those who glorify, للبث في بطنه إلى يوم يبعثون, certainly he would have remained in its belly until the moment they are resurrected. So he reorients from saying that in this verse from chapter 21, he says, indeed I was amongst the wrongdoers, inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin, glory be unto you, subhanaka inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin. And it says here, and if he had not been one of those who glorify, he would have remained in its belly until the moment they are resurrected. So if I don't reorient my position in life, potentially, and seeing the potential wisdom, and that wisdom being, especially as I mentioned at the beginning, about experiences I don't necessarily like, but the interesting thing in those experiences is that they bring me back to him, my source of existence. They shed light on my wrongdoing and maybe the deficiency in myself and maybe my ungratefulness towards him. And in those positions, do I come back to him and express gratitude and thanks? Because if I don't, I will remain in the belly of the fish until the moment that we're resurrected. And in a sense, what I found interesting is that, or returned really, it's, Yawma Yub'athun. I'm only returned to him, or that connection is, which is sort of predicated on thanks and gratitude and appreciation, is only brought back or resurrected in the moment that I have that realization. So I think, at the last talk was about, resurrection, bringing it into personal life. That happens, that return happens in the moment I realize, that the position I'm in, determined by him, experience that I'm in, determined by him. Only he can determine how I get out of it, not me. Otherwise, that experience becomes my grave, becomes death for me. That's hell, in a sense. That's non-existence. And so who determines? These verses really sort of intertwine everything. So you can't necessarily, one verse talks about this, another verse talks about that, because it's all interwoven together. But as you've already seen, he mentions who determines in these prior verses, because that is really the main crux of the Qur'an, is that who is determining anything from the small to the big. And I think my experiences are small. I think I'm a speck and a speck and a speck, but actually even those things that I'm going through, determined. Otherwise, how can I explain their existence? And so again, the verse, and the man of the fish, when he went angry and thought that never would we determine upon him. It's interesting, I thought about that, like when if I'm angry at something that I'm experiencing, it's it's, I might take the position of, okay, well, he determined and I don't like it, but that also easily leads to the position of that is like one step down the road of saying that, is he really determining anything? Or are things haphazard? Or are things chaos? Which I think we'll, I guess, talk about tomorrow as well. Um, because out of anger is sort of that path to denial potentially, and not seeing his sort of judgment or his wise judgment upon all things that even I don't like. Um, and, which is dangerous because that is darkness. And it's, if I don't call out from that darkness and say that I was wrong, then, that can be, that is the road potentially to hell. And then in the verses from chapter 37, فَنَبَذْنَاهُ بِالْعَرَاءِ وَهُوَ سَقِيمٌ, but we threw him onto the open shore while he was ill. So after calling out and recognizing my wrongdoing, or as Jonah says, recognize my wrongdoing, that, okay, I did not realize, or I may have forgotten, or, I ignored that your judgment, your wisdom, wisdom was at work here. Maybe I didn't recognize that, and I was angry, and I was impatient, and I wasn't happy or satisfied with what I was going through. But I recognized that wrongdoing, and I recognized that all things glorify you, or in other words, all things go back to you. They all point to you. They all recognize you. An illness recognizes you. My experience of that illness recognizes you. It looks to you. My feeling of not liking it looks to you, and therefore my response needs to go back to you. My sort of plea or recognition goes back to you. And when that happens, am I thrown onto the open shore, while I was ill? Salvation, so to speak. That's where salvation is on that open shore, thrown, coughed up by the belly of the beast, by the belly of the fish, onto that shore. Just like, for example, maybe a virus will cough me up to the shore of the on that shore where I may find salvation. I may be ill, physically ill, for example, but in that physical illness do I find salvation? It's interesting. This is sort of contrasting sort of the modern conception of, illness and disease, for example, where things are sort of, they're evil and they need to be combated against, fought against. But rather, as the Quran says, the fish is my companion. And the fish is a sort of means for salvation. It's a different perspective, different take on gratitude. وَأَنبَتْنَا عَلَيْهَا شَجَرَةً مِّن يَقْطِينٍ, and we caused to grow over him a plant of gourd, or like squash. And do I see in myself, after being thrown onto that open shore, that I'm being taken care of? And it's interesting, it mentions a plant of gourd, and a gourd is like squash, and it has many uses. Quite often, if you read, there's some sort of, a lot of mythology, but especially about creation. But one of the main things people use gourds for is to carry water, which is sort of a sign of life. And growth is also a sign of life. And so do I find life, not life, let's say physical life, but the life of the spirit, because that's what really is alive. Do I see that? Do I find that after being thrown onto the open shore and finding that salvation, or which was him, knowing that he determines things, and that really is salvation, because then things are not chaos or haphazard, and that only he can answer my concerns or need for health, or need for a cure, or need for, and even even if that illness is not cured necessarily, physically speaking, knowing that only he can do it. And do I see that sort of rejuvenating me, so to speak? That's what that sort of shajar, that plant growing over me, sort of represents. And then chapter 68, verse 49. لولا أن تداركه نعمة من ربه لنبذ بالعراء وهو مذموم. Again, talking about if not that a favor overtook from him from his Lord, surely he would have been thrown onto the naked shore while he was blameworthy. So again, it's interesting. Even my recognition and even finding that sort of salvation from the belly of the fish on the shore, the open shore, that also is sort of a favor from my Lord as well, in that belief and the recognition through belief, especially of his determination, his wisdom, so that I can show gratitude and thanks, that also is from him. You know, that is also a favor. So that is also a favor from him. And as I write here, do I see his favor overtaking me regardless of my perception, especially when thrown onto the shore? You know, I can have a certain perception, but if, you know, the moment I reorient myself, do I see that, you know, thing, I was being led back to him, maybe through an experience I don't like, but really, what does it mean at the end of the day in the grand scheme of things, that particular experience when you look, or when you have that connection to eternity? And I'm not sort of discounting experiences. What I'm saying is, if you weigh the two, that is really what one is looking for. Otherwise, they're drowned, or the belly of the fish becomes the grave. A virus becomes my grave. A disease becomes my grave. Cancer potentially becomes my grave. Not saying that I like them, but they can potentially be the end of me. Not necessarily physically only, but spiritually as well. And so what is the result? Because I mean, there's a perception that, okay, oh well, I believe, okay, and I see his judgment at work, and I recognize his will, his hand over all things. But what's in it for me then? Sort of transactional, in a way. Okay, well, if I recognize my wrongdoing, why doesn't he cure me of my illness? Why doesn't he lift a pandemic per se? Okay, I do this, he should do that. Very transactional in that regard. But here, the Quran is painting a different picture about what that recognition results in. What is the profit of it? In chapter 10, verse 98, فلولا كانت قرية آمنت فنفعها إيمانها إلا قوم يونس لما آمنوا كشفنا عنهم عذاب الخزي في الحياة الدنيا ومتعناهم إلى حين. Then there has not been any town that believes, so that belief benefited it, except the people of Jonah. So emphasis on belief is that I can maybe be cured of my illness, but that's for a short while. That's on a temporary base, even though my spirit looks towards eternity, has an eternal aspect to it, because it's beyond time, it's beyond space. And belief, in a sense, is also beyond space and beyond time. That is where really the benefit is. And in the Quran, it's saying, no town has believed. There's been no benefit to any town, essentially, except if they believe, just like the people of Jonah. When they believed, we removed them from the punishment of disgrace in the life of the world, and we granted them enjoyment for a while. It's interesting, tying belief to punishment, or the removal of punishment, of disgrace in the life of the world. Now, somebody may say, okay, again, as I mentioned, like, okay, I believe, so why doesn't this X, Y, and Z happen? In one sense, you know, though it's not my emphasis today, in one sense, X, Y, and Z is only removed, let's say, except if a people believe, you know, let's say there's an injustice in the world, only if a group or a collection of people believe, not just one. That's sort of the wisdom and order of the creation that's set by the creator of the universe, heavens and the earth. But in another sense, the disgrace in my life really is in one aspect far greater than that, if I don't believe, if I don't have the belief perspective on things, that things are determined by him, that he sets the affairs in order, and I'm simply experiencing in my only position and only job and only responsibility, really, at the end of the day, the most important aspect is is to see that, and therefore develop a connection with him over that through those experiences. And in that sense, do I then experience the world very differently? See it as an enjoyment. It's interesting, some people may think it's crazy, but maybe an illness becomes an enjoyment then. I don't like the illness physically, but spiritually becomes an enjoyment in drawing close to him. And then the other next verse, فَأَسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So we responded to him and we saved him from distress, and thus we saved the believers. So I mentioned earlier, what is the response, and how do I know the response is correct? Well, the response really essentially is in my satisfaction. And that satisfaction can only proceed from belief, or that connection to what my spirit desires, sort of that eternal connection to him. Because I want to respond. I don't want to respond necessarily from people, because people exist on a temporary base. I don't want recognition, or really, and people do seek it, because people fundamentally are seeking recognition or connection or sort of aid or help. Generally speaking, that's a human condition, a human feeling, but it's not satisfactory because I want that on an internal basis. And so belief is the only way to achieve that. It's the only satisfactory position. That's how I know my response is appropriate, because in belief, through belief, do I see that he's responding to me, that I'm in a position I cannot find my way out. I don't necessarily like it, but I see he has control over all affairs, including my life. And so that saves me from distress. So I may try to flee, as Jonah does, onto that ship and be thrown over, and therefore throw over that aspect of messengership within me to see the world from a certain perspective. But it's only he who can save me from distress, to return back to him and see that the message within that aspect of messengership. And thus we save the believers. Because belief is connected to him. And that's really salvation. وَأَرْسَلْنَاهُ إِلَى مِئَةٍ أَلْفٍ أَوْ يَزِيدُونَ. And we sent him to 100,000 or more. And, again, what is that 100,000 or more sort of reference to? In the sense they said Jonah was sent back to his people who all believed after escaping punishment. But who are my companions necessarily? Who are my companions through that worldview? Do I see potentially all creatures, 100,000 or more, so many of them, potentially other people, as believing companions, not just as people, other aspects of creation, other objects, other creatures? That is, in a way, a very different perspective, one in which one shows gratitude for what one's experiencing and the position they're in, and thankfulness, rather than having anger and impatience. Having patience with what's going through and seeing everything as a companion, even maybe the things that I'm experiencing, and seeing them as being sent by the same source, and being thankful that my life is being determined from something beyond the nature of the world. Nobody else is determining it, really, at the end of the day, but an absolute source is doing that, and that is something to be quite grateful for and thankful for. فَآمَنُوا فَمَتَّعْنَاهُمْ إِلَى حِينٍ. And they believe, so we gave them enjoyment for a while. And it's in belief do I find enjoyment. Otherwise, life is completely dissatisfactory. Even if my life is for a while, That's what matters, because that's what the life of this world is about. It's about belief. That is the whole point of life, or this temporary life, is its belief that is associated with it, or it's the unfolding of belief through the life of this world. That's how I find enjoyment. Otherwise, I'm completely unsatisfied with my experiences, completely ungrateful with what I'm going through potentially. And then lastly, فَأَجْتَبَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَجَعَلَهُ مِنَ الصَّالِحِ. But his Lord chose him and made him from amongst the righteous. It's a very, again, very sort of uh, con- soothing sort of perspective, is that where I'm at, the position I'm at was chosen. It was not haphazardly chosen, it was not chaotically chosen, but was chosen by one who is beyond the nature of the world, must be absolute and all wise and all knowledgeable and all powerful, no matter what other people try to decide for me. But he's the one that's made the choice for me about what I'm going through. That is quite satisfactory. And in that satisfaction, do I express sort of gratitude? And that gratitude is in, as the verse I mentioned, Subhanaka inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin. Glory be unto you indeed, or La ilaha illa ant subhanak inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin. There is no God but you, indeed, or glory be unto you, indeed, I was amongst the wrongdoers. That's gratitude. That's recognizing my mistake and showing appreciation for him. Um, it's very, um, it's very much against or it cuts down the ego, so to speak, in the sense that, I don't take things. I hand over the world back to him, to his hand, because it all belongs to him. And, that's what gratitude is recognizing that I've been given. I have no control over anything really. And I've been chosen to be given certain things. Things that I, may not completely love or like or not like, but necessarily given for a particular reason. And that reason is to see myself more than just something of the nature of this world, but to see myself looking to beyond this world, back to him, as my spirit does, beyond space and time itself. And so in the summary, as the verse 21, verse 87 points out, وَذَنُّونَ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا فَظَنَّ أَن لَّن نَّقْدِرَ عَلَيْهِ فَنَادَىٰ فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ أَن لَّا إِلَٰهَ إِلَّا أَنتَ سُبْحَانَكَ إِنِّي كُنتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. If one were to open up a dictionary, they would not find this definition of gratitude. لَا إِلَٰهَ إِلَّا أَنتَ سُبْحَانَكَ إِنِّي كُنتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. To me, that's the definition of gratitude right there. There is no God but you. Glory be unto you. Indeed, I was amongst the wrongdoers. Because one could literally apply that phrase to anything that I experience in life, good or bad for that matter. Good, it may be easier, or if I forget, that's also wrongdoing. It's more pronounced in something I don't like, but even in a good thing, in something I like, I completely maybe forget that there is no God but you, glory be unto you. Maybe I take the experience for granted and don't think twice about it. It's only in the experiences I don't like really does that progress happen. And that to me is the definition of gratitude right here. And so in conclusion, and here, because I know there may be some questions or comments. So reflect on my condition and recognize how I feel. That's one important part of the process, a very important part. Do not throw the message overboard, which is within me. The message is not out there somewhere. It's within me, just like with Jonah. The message is with him. And if I run away from that ship, or run away to the ship from my experiences, run away from how I feel, I'm throwing myself overboard along with the message, and therefore I'm swallowed by the fish of the world. That becomes my grave, rather than seeing things as my companions, potentially. Recognize my wrongdoing, which is gratitude fundamentally. That's the first step, and seek forgiveness from my self-imposed punishment. Because, that I severed the connection by not seeing
Suhail, we cannot hear you.
Still cannot hear you. I believe there was a technical problem with Suhail's computer. So let me see if he's here. He's not, which means he will probably join us in a minute. Meanwhile, if you like to share your comments, questions, you can do so. Not questions because Suhail is not here, but you can share your comments while waiting for him.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Thanks, Syra here. Can we speak or just write? Or
Oh, please go ahead.
yeah. So very quickly, this was a brilliant. All the presentations, yours and everybody's, has been just superbly brilliant. Mashallah, spiritually so uplifting, and intellectually so challenging to absorb. I almost think that this is like an intellectual feast, and a spiritual one at that, because when we are talking about so much of our lives, goal is about preservation of movement, and we are trying to still our minds and still our spirits and still our focus and reorient it back towards death and dying and the process of afterlife and the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What I feel is important as we connect with Quran being such an interactive code book for us, alhamdulillah, and Allah Ta'ala's 99 names also, and how each verse and each chapter in Quran with the title is telling me something. Like, I simply am just in awe of the titles of different surahs when Allah Ta'ala tells us the parables of different Anbiya and prophets. And I think in that regard, the topic and the title of this presentation, that fish for thought rather than food for thought, is quite enigmatic. I think that in that respect, we are all carrying the fire that we have to go through and sit in, like Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. We all have some stick to throw and see if it turns into a snake, like Musa alayhi salam. We have to build our ships to be in retreat on the sea of life, like Nuh alayhi salam. We do have the cross to bear, like Isa alayhi salam. And we certainly do have the mission of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to carry. And so when I think about younger generations of Muslim youth, and any youth really, non-Muslim also, because they could be potential Muslim, and the stories, this way, the psychology of the dialogue that Allah Ta'ala carries on with either with Jibreel alayhi salam, with prophets, with referring to other prophets, like in Surah Yunus, I think Allah Ta'ala is giving an example of what not to do as a prophet, and yet still showing his infinite mercy that, and if you turn to me in humility and gratitude and patience, I'm going to be humbly dismissing your flaw. I'm going to let you find salvation and redemption. And so there is hope in these parallels that we try to draw from our lives in times today that perhaps are complicated on a different level than the missions of the prophets were. And in the context of my own personal work and professional life and personal coming to terms with my grief and my life-threatening illnesses that I've endured and perhaps still am not off the hook, I feel that it gives me that sense, it is preparing me. All of these presentations today are preparing me that if I were to die, I know it. I have a sense of prediction that this is inevitable, eventual, and nothing can surpass once Allah Ta'ala says kun fayakun in terms of leading me towards the afterlife continuation and ending my time here on earth. I'm just speaking the way we think of life in general is shook up by a presentation like this, because it is helping us recognize the ultimate reality of our existence, both from the ends of spiritual and divine destination and challenge or purpose. And while we are looking towards eternity, as the ayats mentioned in this presentation from Surah Yunus, we are also very much connected to surviving here on earth in the shells of our bodies. And hence, from a mind, body, spirit perspective, given Islamic psychology also, that intellect and ruh and qalb, they have a connection. And all of this is this whole circuitry of the human body and intellect and soul and heart and the linguistic ability and senses of hearing and seeing that Allah Ta'ala again and again invites us to be grateful for and ponder because of these faculties that He has given us and blessed us with, is ultimately our GPSs, so to speak, to go back and return back before the arrival, the actual spiritual arrival into the heavens to Allah Ta'ala, once we will be called, be ready on a standby. And that's how I take it. This has been just an amazing day in my life. Thank you so much, all of the presenters. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khairan. Suhail, I see you are back. In your absence, I took the liberty of giving the mic to people. You can take over from where you left.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Syra, for those comments. Yeah, inshallah, it was benefit. I think, all the presentations today, especially because the Quran really reorients our perspective on life. I think, inshallah, if that's what we can take away today, that's what's important. So I appreciate your comments. Anybody else have any thoughts? Oh yeah, go ahead, Kareem.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Suhail, for the discussion on the topic. I had like a series of questions. So I wanted to ask again the symbol of the gourd and what it entails. But I wanted to focus on two other questions. So is the main goal of gratitude to relieve worldly pain and or push away punishment, so inevitable doom? Because I feel like the verse maybe highlighted that, but I don't know if that's the primary goal. And then the third question is, if you find yourself on the laden ship or like overburdened or feeling like overtaxed, is it a problem inherently in your soul, or is it a problem in your heart that you've accumulated during maybe your lifetime? I hope these questions make sense. Thank you.
They do. So at least to your first question, the Quran to me like makes very specific references to certain things, and it mentioned the gourd plant, and I said like in especially in ancient cultures and historically, gourds have been used for many utensils in life. It's a very important aspect of life, not just to eat, but to be used. And one aspect was very important aspect is holding water as a place to, to hold and store water, and water being like an aspect of life, or the most fundamental aspect of material life, so to speak. And that when the plant grows over me, that gourd plant grows over me, do I see, and that's when I'm on the shore, the open shore, do I see myself being rejuvenated, or by that recognition, by excuse me, by saying that there is no God but you, glory be unto you, indeed I am amongst the wrongdoers? Do I find a sort of satisfaction and rejuvenation and resurrection in that, in my humanity? So that was what I was referring to there. And then your second question about punishment, really, the that is really, to me, that's why I emphasize that aspect of the verse. And to go back, La ilaha illa ant subhanaka inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin. If I don't see that in my experiences, then that is the punishment. Because then, good or bad, I may be, let's say, I may be impatient and angry with what's happening in my life. And in a sense, that is a pathway to not seeing things are being determined by him. نَقْدِرَ عَلَيْهَا, that we would determine upon him. And if I don't do that, that's my punishment, because then in a sense, I think, what's happening maybe out there and within my life is sort of haphazard, chaotic, by chance, because maybe something happens to me, why didn't it happen to that person? Or something happens to somebody else, why didn't that happen to me? That's my entire life can be boiled down to that. And so, and especially when I don't like something, I try to want to run away, and I'm overburdened, as you said, by my experiences, and then thrown overboard eventually. That is punishment in and of itself. And so there's no contentment there. Does not matter how rich or poor somebody is, materially speaking. A rich man can be, as often said, completely dissatisfied with life, or as somebody who's poor, completely content. And they have two very different perspectives potentially because of that. And so the rich man, in that sense, may be the one who's punished, actually. I think I saw Muhammad Saeed's hand up. If you want to talk.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. I wanted to share a point, one of the points that stayed with me in this presentation, that was highlighted a couple of times, that in a nutshell, I receive it in this way, that the divine being and the necessity of his all-encompassing message. This connection really, I think it's very important. As it was said in your presentation, that the experience itself is really, it's not in our responsibility, but what we are capable of, what we are capable is that we can have a different perception of our experiences, and it comes, or it is our perception is always related to some kind of thought process or training or education. So that's our choice. The way we train ourselves automatically, maybe we can say that becomes our perception. So, since the universe is already right now, here and now, is announcing that there is the source of this existence of this universe is all aware, all knowing, determining everything. And it cannot, my life experience cannot be outside of his all-encompassing speech or message. So it's as I said, this is the point that I really like so much, that it gives me the hope to step into the realm, or try to find a speech, or try to find the guidance for my particular case, for my particular experience, because there must be an speech to my experience, since my experience is created by the all-knowing and by the one who determines everything, since there's nothing that can determine anything. Thank you again.
Yeah, that's a, as you said, a very important aspect, is the determining aspect, the determining nature of the world or my life, and things being chosen for me. And seeing that from that perspective really sort of changes my perspective on how I see things. And if I don't have that perspective, then things become painful, a painful punishment, as the Quran says quite frequently. It's only in belief do I experience enjoyment. Otherwise, I can't. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments? Okay. Actually, Yusuf, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm still thinking, but this leaving or escaping with anger was an interesting point, because I am having some goals in life, and when they are not met, I become angry and just escape or change course or try to avoid. So I guess the thing that makes me angry, I'm trying to avoid it, hoping that it's going to be okay if I just disappear from the scene. So this is making me think, because who am I? What am I angry with? Who am I angry with? Apparently this point is what I recognize, because as I escape from the scene, as I abandon the area, hoping that I'm going to find peace and solitude, the creator says, is this what you want? Then let me make you taste it more. So because the problem was not in the outside, because this is why I was angry with it. I was angry with my goals not being achieved, but I thought it is because the others didn't accept, like in that setup of that story. So messenger delivers message and it's not being accepted, and I take it as the problem of them, and this since they do not accept it and this is defying my expectation, so I say, okay, I'm going to leave this environment. But as if the creator says, okay, yes, you need solitude to find where the problem is, and doesn't really lift source of my anger, but puts me into even more of a position in which I'm going to realize this. And in my personal life, this is what I'm truly seeing. I am being angry with some expectation of mine in life, and I feel like, oh, they don't understand, or they don't do, or they don't accept, or like it's some injustice that is done to me by them. So I'm angry with them, and I'm just changing the scene to avoid the problem. But I am being put in a position like this fish, so much so that I'm going to realize, or at least give an opportunity to realize, that the problem was within me. It was, as you were saying, of my perception of the scene or the event that's going through. So that I'm going to wake up, realize, but escaping, because in the first place, actually, the one that I was angry with, the creator makes me realize that actually I was angry with my creator, maybe unconsciously. On the surface, I was angry with the people or the events, but making me realize that actually you are blaming me, the creator says. This is why, as far as I understand, the perception of Jonah in here is, no, you were not blameworthy. Actually, I was the one that should have been blameworthy in the first place. So it's a wake-up call for me. Whenever I'm angry with the scenes in life, who am I angry with? And actually in the previous presentation also, there was this mentioning of complaint, because the complaint is coming again from the same sort of, I am dissatisfied with something that I'm going through in life, but maybe I should sit back and question, who am I discontent with? What am I discontent with? So these two discussions today makes me question, whenever I'm angry or dissatisfied, I guess I need to take a pause and say, who am I dissatisfied with?
Yeah, so thank you. It's a very good summary of the presentation. You know, that's really, as you said, you know, what matters is my inward perspective, and you know, I don't control necessarily what happens out there, and that's not my responsibility. You know, and but fundamentally, as you said, it comes down to my expectation of things, and my expectation is a sort of imposition. I'm imposing something on the creator, my expectation, and when it doesn't meet my expectation, again, transactional, then I get angry at him. And it's a very it's sort of expecting him to do something as I please, when I really have no I have no power in and of itself. And if I see that those things are really being chosen out of from his knowledge by a wise choice, through a wise choice, then my perspective also changes, and therefore I don't begin to impose things on him, but I begin to accept and recognize my wrongdoing in that expectation, and imposing on him something that is not does not necessarily need to be the case. Some event that needs to happen. That's when I begin to show gratitude for what I'm experiencing and what I'm going through. Cyrus Choudhury, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the wonderful talk and everyone's reflections. I just have a quick reflection as well. Just piggybacking off of what Sister Sada said earlier, how we have to sit in our own like fire and stuff. So I just wanted to, like, I'm so thankful that you used this dua specifically, because it literally changed my life many times. And I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of us today, like young skeptics, it's like we need a life and death situation, or we need, like, literally, and like we just need something terrifying to happen or something, and then we believe in Allah. Like, you know, we need like our miracle, right? Like, you know, so for me, I mean, I'm not saying that that was kind of me, but not always, but this dua specifically, because why did Allah like recommend us to say, you know, la ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minadh dhalimin? It's when you're basically in times of like desperate need, sort of, kind of like Prophet Jonah was when he was in the whale, right? And unfortunately, I just wish it wasn't the case where we turn back to Allah during those times, right? And like you said, gratitude, that's one of the, you know, fundamental staples of Islam, right? When you are grateful, Allah will give you more. But I just, for me personally, it's more of like a balance, right? It's these terrible moments versus, you know, when we are so grateful. You know, when like, for me, I want to turn back to Allah more when I am, you know, with these everyday things, right? Which I don't like. We pray 5 times a day, but I just feel like it becomes so generic. Like, you know, do we really, you know, grasp what we are saying? You know, things like that. But going back to the whole expecting from Allah, I just recently learned a story I wanted to share. It was basically, I think, from the Sahaba's time. There was a man who would have some money under his pillow, and then he would give a whole bunch to his nephew and tell him to spend it on the sake of Allah, right? For donations or whatnot, right? Or, you know, giving food to people or families. And then the nephew would come back and ask, how do you have all this money all the time? And apparently it just magically appeared under the pillow. And his uncle said that, you know, I trust in Allah and my intention is to spend it for Allah. And like he never expected anything from Allah, but he would just, this is his true intention for doing his action before Allah like granted him, you know, magic money or something under his pillow. And then this nephew, he's like, you know what, I'll try the same thing. So I think it was like 1,000 dinars. He put it under his pillow and he expected it to come back the next day. He's like, I spent the whole thing for Allah's sake. I donated, I did this, that. And then he just lost all his money. So the uncle replied that I did it because of like, you know, the genuine intention, and then, you know, never expecting anything, right? And the kid did it because he was testing Allah, right? So yeah, that's kind of the difference. And yeah, so I think that's it. Thank you.
I think thank you, Sarah. You've shared a nice way, if I may. Very quickly, something comes to mind. I would like to get your comment on that, Brother Suhail, that in the dialogue with Allah Ta'ala and Prophet Yunus, we learn the etiquette and the adab of speaking to Allah Ta'ala. And the other thing is that it then goes to a higher level of purification, the humility with which he's saying the ayat karima, the dua that Allah Ta'ala, I'm the wrongdoer and all praise belongs to you. And you mentioned it very beautifully that this is how you give back the keys to the mansion to whom it belongs, so to speak. And we are in no way to feel entitled that Allah Ta'ala, I demand of you to do. We can pray. I can pray that Allah Ta'ala reunite me with my husband when I have to go. When you call me, let me live a dignified life, please help me ease my way to Jannah. But the trials that are written in my destiny, they are mine to accept. And so in that case, when I look around, the millions of people, they are all going through all of the symbolic references that you made, just alone for this particular prophet Yunus alayhi salam, that the fish and the sea and the companion, and not taking it as a companion, or looking at the retreat into the bottom of the sea, in the darkness of the belly of the fish, all of the details with which Allah Ta'ala himself explains that how complex and how complicated sometimes we feel that we are on a wheel, a hamster wheel, and there is no escape from it. And in that moment, or in that, it's a small price to pay if we look at it now with the expanded reflection and periodic reconnection with Quran and the parables of the prophet stories, that it was possible for them because they were that much more resilient in their faithfulness or faithfulness. But it is that much more harder for us because we are getting lost more and more into the dunya. And so the bars are high for somebody who is being tested and who doesn't have the prophetic stamina, so to speak, to endure the kinds of faith testing trials that Allah Ta'ala put them through. So my one prayer that I always make whenever I feel sad or upset or scared or unwittingly blaming Allah Ta'ala, why just something happened like this, that my life got turned around between cancer and my husband passing on, and many other losses and secondary losses, is that there is a reason Allah Ta'ala has chosen me to be experiencing illness, life-threatening illness or widowhood, because he perhaps wants me to help women in these situations. Or if I couldn't have children in the 10 years of my life with my husband, perhaps I need to focus that time to help other people's children. But the prayer is not make me bitter and allow me to be closer to you or connect me to people who will guide me back to you. Otherwise, everything that you said in this particular presentation, if I were to look at it from a negativistic point of view, an entitled point of view, and a ungrateful point of view, then I know very well, Allah Ta'ala clearly says that if you're not grateful, if you're not humble, if you're not kind and recognizing that your stature is of the abd or ibadi, and I am your creator, then all of those other things that I don't even want to think about, that I will forget you too, or I will not face you, or I will not be concerned with you. So I think this is real. The dynamics are being shared and shed upon importance wise so many times through all the parables of our prophets. And if we were to not time and again remind ourselves of these, it's very easy to get lost in this blame game and victimhood. And alhamdulillah, I'm glad that these reminders are available from an intellectual and theological perspective in the Quran and by people like today who gathered to emphasize on them, because we as adults even need them in the times that we are living. And inshallah, it just makes them stronger in our hearts so that we continue to hold on to the ropes of Allah. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah to you both for your comments. I appreciate them. I believe its time is up. So I don't know. I guess I'll hand it over back to Birkan or to Yusuf or Abdurrahman. I'm not sure what you would like to do now, but it's 5.
Jazakallah khairan. Let's close the session, end the session at least first, and then we can decide what to do next.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.